I'm a Regional Services Manager with New South Wales Farmers, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of 6 webinars on rural crime. Rural crime is everyone's business, and the New South Wales Farmers Association and the New South Wales Police Rural Crime Prevention Team have worked together to bring you the 2020 Tackling Rural Crime webinar series. These informative and solutions-based sessions will help you prevent rural crime on your property and in your community. Being the largest state-based farmer or member farming organisation in Australia, we at New South Wales Farmers take rural crime very seriously. And with our friends from the New South Wales Police Rural Crime Prevention Team, we hope you find the webinars of value. Please do not hesitate to ask questions in the Questions tab throughout the webinar, and we will try to answer as many questions from you, the participants, as we can. Together we can all make a difference. I would now like to welcome Detective Sergeant Damien Knott, who tonight will deliver the webinar on target hardening. Thank you, Damien.
Thanks, Michael. I'd just like to check that I'm being heard there all right.
Loud and clear, Damien. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge and welcome Detective Chief Inspector Whiteside, our state coordinator for the Rural Crime Prevention Team, and my counterpart in the Central North region, Detective Sergeant Bennett Nolan. I think their images are going to come up here shortly. So look, firstly, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for participating. We really appreciate the time you've taken to leave your busy schedules and join us. We know it's a very busy time of the year for you at the moment. I would also like to thank New South Wales Farmers Association for organising the webinar and their ongoing commitment to building a relationship and contributing to the Tackling Rural Crime project. We acknowledge things are tough on the land at the moment, and we hope these webinars will help with a few key points, including knowledge of who the Rural Crime Prevention Team is and where we're located, strategies to target harden your property, and methods to report crime. Please feel free to send your questions through the moderator, who will wait until after the presentation. And while we'll talk about tonight's key subject in fairly broad strokes, I think that the questions will really be an opportunity to hone in on some more poignant elements that are relevant to you. So please make sure you fire the question in. And the good thing is that you can do it relatively anonymously as well, which is a good thing. And we'll answer those questions at the end. Then maybe slide 4, if you wouldn't mind. Sorry, I might have jumped ahead a little. Thank you very much. So prior to the creation of the Rural Crime Prevention Team as it stands at the moment, there were 35 rural crime investigators across the state and 1 intelligence analyst. Then in 2017, Commissioner Mick Fuller made a commitment to the people of regional New South Wales to address incidents of rural crime in our state. What we'll show you here today is a slice of that commitment, and as a result, more specialised police resources have been deployed into regional New South Wales, such as additional rural crime investigators who are specialists in their field of policing, and increasing the number of police on the ground to fight rural crime. We currently have 52 members within our team, and they consist of Detective Chief Inspector Whiteside, who's with us tonight, who is the State Rural Crime Coordinator based at Mudgee, 4 detective sergeants, including myself, as zone coordinators based at Parks, Moree, Cootamundra and Casino. There are 43 rural crime investigators who are specialist detectives located in 26 non-metropolitan locations across New South Wales. There are 3 intelligence analysts who are civilians that are based at Parks, Casino and Cootamundra, and there's 1 rural crime and policy project officer working out of Dubbo. Rural Crime Prevention Team has been created to increase our capabilities to support communities in the prevention, disruption and response to rural crime. The rural crime investigators are subject matter experts in rural crime. They're an integral part of the New South Wales Police Force challenge to meet community and industry expectations in remote, rural and regional New South Wales. And the map you see there outlines where our team members are located across New South Wales. It's broken into 4 zones, as you can see there: central, northern, northwest and southern zones. And the detective sergeants coordinate all the rural crime investigators across each zone in conjunction with the local police districts to target rural crime. In 2014, the New South Wales Police Force amended the definition of rural crime. As it stands now, it's incidents of crime that impact on the function of the pastoral, agricultural and aquaculture industries. And the key phrase in amongst all that is impact on the function. This is because the definition doesn't include crimes or incidents of, that are committed in rural locations, predominantly those that impact on the function of the rural industries. This leads me into, what does a rural crime investigator do? So a rural crime investigator is an investigator who is a subject matter expert on rural crime. They're detectives and they undergo the same training as all detectives in the New South Wales Police Force. The rural crime investigators provide expertise on rural crime issues to the police district they're housed in. It's important for everyone to know, though, that all police can take a report and respond to rural crime, and that will often happen in the first instance until rural crime specialists become involved. We must tell you that RCIs or rural crime investigators don't investigate all crimes in rural areas. That would be impossible just with the staffing limitations. All police in rural New South Wales are able to take initial reports and respond to rural crime. At the end of the day, a rural crime is still just a crime. Ladies and gents, that gives a bit of an overview and background to our team and how it's formatted and where we are across the state. I'll now move into tonight's specialist subject, which is target hardening. Now, target hardening, just to get started, is more or less law enforcement talk, and all it means basically is strategies that you can put in place to reduce the risk of you becoming a victim of a crime. And that's as straightforward as it is. So there's a lot that we could go through in this subject, and we're going to talk about it in pretty broad strokes and hope that you've got a few questions at the end for us. But to move into it, the more technical definition is that target hardening is making targets more resistant to attack or more difficult to steal or damage. So if you think of target hardening in the context of your own property, it's a bit like peeling through the layers of an onion. And tonight we're going to sort of start at the boundary fence and work our way across the paddocks and past the shed into the house, where you've got chaff bags full of cash hidden under the bed, or at least we're hoping they will be full by the end of this season, if it's all it's promising to be anyway. So there's 10 principles that I'm going to talk about just briefly. And the best way, I think, for you to think about it is from the point of view of a criminal, rather than a person who's interacting with their environment as their workplace day to day and where they live. So what that will do is help identify weak spots and vulnerable areas on your property, and maybe give you some options to treat those weaknesses and increase your security, and therefore driving down the risk of you becoming a victim. So the first strategy is actually target hardening. And this is obviously one of the most important. And what we're talking about here, so the definition of a target to start off with is anything a criminal would want to steal or damage. And it could be an object, an item of property, livestock, plant equipment, chemicals, anything basically. There's no limit to what a criminal might have in their sights when they're interacting on your property. So I'm going to talk about a number of strategies and ways that you might be able to target harden the property within your holding. And it'll be from the very simple and cost effective, basically zero to very little cost and take you very little time to implement, but could have a profound effect when we're talking about target hardening. So a pretty good start is a lot of folks listening tonight may have a lock and a chain in use around their property. And in seminars that we've run in the past, and we can interact a little more easily with the audience, we talk about this, and a lot of folks say, well, the old lock and chain's not much use. It just causes a bit of extra time, and we've got to access areas of our property, and the thieves will just cut it, and they'll get access anyway. It'll take them 2 minutes. But what we do open your eyes to, and this feeds into the whole shifting your thinking about how you might assess security and strategies you might put in place, is I like to think of it of making the crooks have to make some decisions, and above that, take action. So what I mean by that is that if a would-be criminal comes to your front gate, and for example, there's a sign on there saying there are surveillance cameras in use on this property, they've all of a sudden, you're making them make a decision. Do I take a chance and go in there and perhaps get myself filmed, or do I walk away and go up to a neighbouring property where there may be no sign? So we've got to get them thinking right from the point where before they enter your property about whether they're going to take the risk, risk versus reward. Am I going to take the risk of being caught, or am I going to move on and find a softer target somewhere? So getting back to the lock and chain, it works in the same way. They've got to make a decision. Am I going to enter this property? Because if I am going to, I've got to cut the lock and chain. And there have been instances where the locks have been cut, and then they're on the board for a criminal offence straight away. Probably not going to go to jail for it, but it's malicious damage nonetheless. And there is an act that they have to commit, which then leads into, more often than not, physical evidence. And there has been a case where we were able to recover a part of a cut chain. And once we got an idea of some information about who the criminal was, we later found that person driving a ute. And luckily for us, they had bolt cutters in the back tray of the ute, which we were able to seize as evidence. And the jaw marks when cutting items such as a chain from the bolt cutters being used are almost as unique as a fingerprint. They're called striations, and as the jaw cuts through the metal, it leaves those lines, and our forensic teams are able to provide expert statements and match those lines up if the bolt cutters match the chain, that is, and it's good enough for a conviction, which happened on this occasion. So you can see that all of a sudden, despite the fact that you may need to get contractors in and you're not there and gates are locked, and it's not just a one size fits all with any of these strategies we're going to talk about tonight, it is just that simple lock and chain has maybe a little bit more value than we first thought. So moving through, like as you sit probably in your office or your lounge room there tonight on the computer, having a look at this presentation and listening in, just think about that from a criminal's point of view, that is. So where else are you vulnerable? So I suppose everyone, as a starting point at least, has a quad bike or a motorcycle. You got a tractor there, truck, you got the town car and the work ute, and probably a number of other vehicles. So just ask yourself, where's the keys to all those, all those vehicles? And usually when we've got an audience, everyone sort of looks at the floor and has a bit of a giggle. But look, and this presentation is not about suggesting that you should be removing keys from every vehicle, but it is just to start you thinking about, should I have the keys in all of those vehicles sitting out there? Maybe they're right under your nose at the house and quite secure. But look, it is just thinking about those things. So removing keys from vehicles where you can is another thing. Good lock sets on doors, and we talk about the boundary fence again, but it is really important to make sure that your stock doesn't stray from your property and therefore become more vulnerable to theft. So good boundary fences and good fences and gates in general. That items of plant and workshop equipment are as best you can stowed away. So if you think about your workshop at the moment, are the big kit of DeWalt battery operated tools sort of sitting around the bench and in a cupboard that's not locked, or other items, your chainsaw and so on, exposed or in the back of the ute, ready for a would-be crook to just get a quick pinch. So all of those things. And recording serial numbers and model numbers of all of those items is also a really good strategy. Not so much from the target hardening point of view, but from property recovery, and it helps our investigations when we're looking for and to recover property. There's often a lot of property sold through police auctions that we know it's been recovered as stolen, but we can't find owners for them. And look, probably one of the biggest issues is we'll talk about livestock. It's vitally important that where possible, you're using permanent identifiers in livestock. This is the greatest deterrent and also the greatest opportunity for recovery that we can have. And it's, pardon me, alongside the use of DNA and other investigative strategies we've got. But if you can permanently identify your stock, that's a great thing to do in terms of theft prevention. Now, I believe that technology is already underway that will ultimately go a long way to solving this problem, and it's a whole nother subject, but just very quickly. So solar powered ear devices that have GPS capability that you can overlay with virtual fencing that give real-time alarms if your stock are leaving the property, and a whole host of other benefits is in the pipeline. So technology will catch up and help us out with that one, but in the meantime, we just do have to work with what we've got. So identifying your stock is obviously vitally important. There are, of course, the NLIS considerations and methods of identification that go along with that, and record keeping. That has proven to be, and experience tells us that when that's used well and there's compliance with that, it really supports and corroborates a lot of the evidence that we need to take to court for investigations. But probably above all is the record keeping of your stock. Good counts at, with your breeding or with husbandry practices, and good consistent record keeping is absolutely vital for, or a really great way forward for when we turn up to commence an investigation. And look, let's face it, it's not to say that we have any doubt that you may have had a loss of stock numbers at some point, but if we can't demonstrate to the courts that the stock existed in the first place through good records, it makes it very hard for us to say then that you've suffered a loss. It's not a deal breaker by any means, and you'd be surprised probably at the amount of people that we go to and say, yeah, we've got good records, and pull out a tatty old little pocket notebook and sort of sift through there trying to get the records up for us, and it's not quite working. So we don't hold that against anyone, but that's what tonight's all about, is just to try and demonstrate from theft prevention point of view and from the investigative side of the house that those things are really important. All sorts of things you can do with target hardening. We had a matter, just to tell a quick couple of stories. Only a couple of weeks ago out near West Wyalong, about $3,000 plus worth of sheep yards were taken. So the victim had gone to the trouble of putting in place some target hardening strategies, and they just unlimited. So he had welded a number of those panels and the race together just to make them harder to steal. But the thieves took along a battery operated angle grinder and were able to cut those things free and steal them anyway. But in the same way as I talked about the crooks having to make some decisions, and your targeted hardening efforts making them actually take action, by cutting those panels away and removing them, in doing so, one of the grinding discs broke and ended up in the grass, and police recovered it. And it's we haven't got the results back yet, but obviously you've got to fit a grinding disc with your hands, and unless you're wearing gloves or whatever, well, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to leave a DNA marker there somewhere. So it gives us a pretty good chance of getting a DNA return and maybe locking someone up. It also tells us that we can make certain inferences around that crime, that someone maybe just had an angle grinder in their truck and it was a crime of opportunity, or it may have been someone that had interacted in that property in recent times and had seen they needed to take an angle grinder along. So it's another point of inquiry that we can make. Right, so moving along, second principle is target removal, and this is pretty straightforward. This is just a case of out of sight, out of mind. So if they can't see it, they're not going to be as inclined to be able to get hands on it. And so anything a criminal might be interested in potentially is put away. So again, talking about keys out of vehicles, there's all sorts of things on the property. Look, there's a list too comprehensive to mention just within time frames we've got, but keeping chemicals under lock and key, I know that there's statutory requirements for some of that, but look, we know things are hard. You're very, very busy with the job at hand, and it's often the case you might have drums of chemical in the back of the ute and so on, and it's a lot of effort. But again, it's not saying that you have to implement or you should be doing X, Y, or Z. This is just a way to think about things going forward. Things like screening or shutting out your workshop so that a crook could fill up the boot of their car with stuff out of your workshop and get away with 10 grand pretty quickly worth of equipment. Any smaller vulnerable items should be stowed away, particularly electronic items. So locking your tractor with all your GPS options that are available these days, spray rigs with all your computerized spraying options that are out there. They're pretty valuable for the rural criminalists to take those types of items. And then of course there's the pumps and chainsaws and all those other different types of small plant items in the shed that are difficult to tuck away, but there's strategies that you can put in place to make sure that they're not just sitting out in the open for a crook to just make it easy for them to take them. So principle 3 is just a little bit different, and this refers to the removing of the means to commit the crime. Whilst principles number 1 and 2 talk about the target or the property that a criminal may target, this talks about ways that you can stop them committing the crimes on the property. And the things like, so your fuel bowser might be full of diesel, but if they can't use the bowser, like if it's an electronic pump or there's a way to lock the handle so that they can't get at it, they can't get the fuel, or at least they've got to then move into making some decisions about destroying your lock or doing something constructive to actually have to steal that commodity. Removing keys again from the motor vehicles so they can't, you know what, we've had crooks that have used tractors to load different property onto their trucks or onto their trailers so they can steal it. It's sort of like salt into the wound. We had instances where they take a trailer load of stolen property from your farm and steal your trailer to move it all away as well. So I know that it's not just a straightforward thing to secure everything on your property, but just to have a think about it. Another good one is locking. You know, we spoke about locking gates and the benefit of that, but a really good one is a lock on your loading ramp. There's nothing worse than just your yards being used to steal your stock when a simple little chain and lock once again and it's not too hard to fit a gate onto the either end of a loading ramp and have that locked up. It really does make a difference. And again, it's that whole principle of making the villains make some decisions and make them do something. Don't make it easy for them. Principle number 4 is about reducing the payoff. So we know that it's one thing to steal your property, it's another thing for them to convert it. And that's simply that, you know, like it's rarely a crook will steal a chainsaw because they want to go and cut a load of wood to keep the family warm. It's usually they want to sell it through whatever means they can to get some quick cash. There's a few things you can do to minimise the option for them to do that, and it may actually be a preventative measure as well. So an experience has told us this, that, you know, there's a lot of things you can do to items of property. You'll often see builders for identification of their property, but they put a bit of spray paint on there. So that's something that you can do as well, probably not adding to the value or the good attractive nature of your equipment, but it is something you can do to just at a quick glance, a criminal will say, well, geez, that's going to be too hard to move. It's too identifiable. I won't be able to sell it without being detected. Engraving or marking property, it's just about making things less disposable and harder to convert into cash. And again, that, you know, branding livestock, you know, it's going to be much harder for someone to dispose of stock that's got earmarks or brands on them, because they need to be altered in some way, and that's another job. It requires skill and equipment and the means to do it, and then the capability to get rid of it once that's happened becomes far less. Reducing, you know, in that reducing the payoff space as well, it's always, you know, getting back to recovering a property that has been stolen. It really helps with identifying owners as well. So principle 5 is access and control. And here we're talking about entry and exit, I suppose, to your property. Again, the locks and chains on the ramps and gates external to your property. Signage on entry points. So we probably all know about the biosecurity signs with a mobile number on there, and that people aren't allowed to enter your property unless they've made contact with you first. So there's that. Also opens up the door through legislation for us for higher penalties if people do breach that and you've got the correct signage in place. Then there's alarms and alert systems that you can put on your property. And look, I'll talk about surveillance cameras in a moment, but in this alarms and the electronic options that are available now, it's pretty much a case of, if you can dream it up, there'll literally be someone, a service provider or options available or equipment that you can source over the internet that will be a solution to it. So there's all sorts of things like, say for example, there's an option to have a magnetic sensor put in your gateway. It's not visible, of course, but it can sorry.
Hi, Damien. It's Anne speaking.
Yeah.
Hi, guests. Thank you very much for participating, and I do apologise, Damien, for interrupting. You were definitely on a flow there, but I just wanted to, we're getting a few questions coming through, and I was just wondering whether you wouldn't mind me interrupting you to maybe ask a question, and also to thank the audience. So I do apologise, we are going to go over the allotted time frame. But Damien, would you mind, I've just got a question that's just come through in one of the chats here. Would you mind if I ask a question?
No, not at all. I'll be happy to have it. Should I have my camera back on now, just out of interest?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay.
So we're just going to throw one question in. I just wanted to let the audience know that we're just a little bit over the allotted time. So I thought I'll just throw one question in, and then we'll head back to you and we'll proceed with the presentation, and hopefully we can get to a few more questions soon. But the first one question I do have here is, what's the best way to create an inventory of the property of the property on my property? There's so many items that could be stolen. So what do you suggest is the best way that could be done? This is just a chat, that question has just popped through. They're just wondering, how do they actually do this?
Yeah, look, thanks, Anne, and thanks for the question. There are many and varied ways that you can create an inventory. And I've personally just had some experience with an app that you can get just on the App Store from your phone, for example, where you can itemize everything on your property that's of value, take a photograph of it, record its serial number, and it's all there in the one concise location. You can bring it up at any time. That also has some other effects, like when you're using insurance, or when you've got warranties and all of those sort of things, you know exactly where everything is. Another way, it can be just as simple as grabbing your mobile phone, walking through your workshop, grabbing each item as you go, filming it and filming its model number and serial number, or take photographs of them, or just pencil and paper, spreadsheets on your computer where you might want to load all of those things. But there are a few options that you can put in place to make sure that you've got good records of all of your property there and all your valuable items for the reasons we've talked about in the presentation.
Thank you so much, Damien. I do appreciate it. We'll let you get back to your presentation, and please, guests, if you'd like any more questions to be asked of the guest presenters we've got here, I urge you to put them in the question section here. And Damien, it's all back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So look, I do apologise, ladies and gentlemen. I've only just come up for air and had a look at the time. So the last part of this presentation I'll make quite quick. So we'll go on to principle number 6, which is the visibility and surveillance. And here there's 3 types of basically surveillance. There's the natural, where you're creating an opportunity for yourselves to have better visibility across your property and all the holdings and all the vulnerable areas within it, and that can be as simple as pruning trees, the careful placement of lighting, for example, the layout of vulnerable or high areas of risks like your workshops and where they're going to be and all that sort of thing. Then there's the formal, so we're talking about the technology, and I was just starting to touch on that. There are solutions for surveillance and alarm and alert systems that are basically unlimited, and there are service providers who specialise in the rural industry, and whilst we're really not in a position as the police force to be able to endorse any particular ones, they are around on the internet and they're not hard to find, and only too willing to come out and do an appraisal and assessment and quotes and all those sort of things. And then the third one is the informal. So that is like rural watch programs, caretakers, instructing your employees to report issues to you straight away in a timely manner. And then, of course, reporting those matters to the police. Principle 7 is environmental design, and it's not that different from number 6. This is if you're making alterations to your property or developing a new property or looking at your own property existing infrastructure with fresh eyes, what you can do to better lay your property out to be more theft resistant and crime resistant. And again, it's things like if you're going to build a set of cattle yards coming up, for example, we know that in the day they used to put them on the roadside, made sense. You can get the truck up and back it up to the fence and basically load out, very easy. But the crooks can do the same thing. Some have got them over the hill and out of sight. The crooks can be working away, happily stealing your livestock while you're in bed and unaware that there's been any vehicles or anyone on your property. So, you know, within line of sight and somewhere, you know, you obviously don't want it too close to your home, but somewhere where you can have a pretty good idea if someone's there, you'll see some lights or some action. Principle number 8, and look, I might leave it here after this one, just looking at the time, is the rule setting. And this is pretty quick. It's this is where you know, it touches on that legislation again, like the biosecurity options for your property and codes of conduct for entry, and it is those biosecurity plans, no trespassing signs, and warning signage on your gate that might be an indicator that there's CCTV and surveillance options being used on the property. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of as far as I think we can take it tonight on target hardening. But please think of this as just a way to broaden your thinking around how you might reduce the risk of becoming a victim of a crime, and ways that you might look at your own situation with just a fresh view, maybe from the point of view of if you were a criminal, what would you target on your own property? And look, that may help us to reduce, and look, experience definitely tells us in the New South Wales Police Force's quest to prevent, disrupt and respond to crime, we know that prevention is always the best option. So moving on from target hardening, just to round things out, it's vitally important that we talk about how to report rural crime. And look, there's a number of ways to do that. If we don't know about the crime, we can't respond to it and investigate it. So there's several ways to report the crime, and one is obviously call your local police station. For non-urgent crime, you can call the police assistance line on 131 444. Provide information anonymously to Crime Stoppers on 1-800 333 000, and you can even report non-emergencies via online services on our community portal. We want to encourage you to report crime, and we understand that you may not know when it happened or who did it or how they did it, and we may not be able to investigate that incident due to a lack of evidence at the time you reported it, but we may be aware of similar incidents. We may know of an offender that commits that particular crime in a particular way, and we need the help to collect those pieces of the puzzle. So we'll talk about Facebook. So the Rural Crime Prevention Team has a Facebook page where we highlight our work, our investigations, operations, incidents of rural crime, and many other points. Outcomes for investigations, focus of our operations, calls for assistance from the community to help locate stolen property, and relevant information pertaining to the rural industry, such as what you need to know when moving livestock, hunter fatigue campaign, farm crime surveys, and more. Our page covers off on regional New South Wales and provides you the opportunity to see what we as the Rural Crime Prevention Team do on a daily basis. This page is an additional tool to connect with the community and also makes a point to offenders that we're targeting them. We'll find out who they are, who they're connected to in the community, and is becoming stronger, which weakens their opportunity to commit crime on farms. We encourage everyone to like our Facebook page. You can find us by typing in Rural Crime Prevention Team in the search bar on Facebook. But ladies and gents, that pretty much concludes my contribution to the webinar anyway. Again, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight, and we'll hook into some more questions if there's some there.
Thank you, Damien. So if Cameron, Bennett and Damien would like to turn their video on so everyone can see them, and I'll start to ask some questions that we've got on here. So one of the first ones that was asked by Liz, and thank you very much for contributing, Liz, is that where does she start when looking at installing surveillance equipment? She knows what she wants to monitor, but where does she start? What does she start to take into consideration? Can you give her any suggestions in regards to that?
Yeah, look, I'll kick the panel off. I'll open this up to Mr. Whiteside and Bennett as well, of course. But look, I'd start at the front gate, Liz, and thank you for the question. But so I spoke briefly about it, and you know, when we're talking about making the crooks make a decision, I spoke to one fellow one day and I said, well, how long would it take you to put a 4-metre pole up right near your front gate? And he said, about 2 minutes. And I said, if it had even a $2 mock-up camera sat up the top and a sign down below saying surveillance, well, when the criminal rolls up to your front gate, the first thing they've got to consider is, have myself and my vehicle already been recorded? So you can see that the benefit of that. But look, to go into your question a little bit further, it comes back to that making an assessment of where your vulnerabilities are on your property. So where would you most likely have a theft occur? What would be of the most value, easiest to move, and your biggest area of vulnerability, I think, would be where you would be looking at putting those cameras, and also any external access to those areas. So you might look at if there's 3 or 4 lanes coming into your workshop, for example, and machinery shed, where you might have a point of access and egress if you were a criminal. Thinking in the criminal's mind, that will help you determine where you need to put those surveillance options and perhaps what type of options you need. And look, I should say another option is that if you are interested in some input from the police, a rural crime investigator would only be more than happy to come out to your property and help you make a security assessment as well and talk about those very things. So I don't know, sir, if you've got anything to add, or Bennett? You're muted.
Okay, looks like Cameron's got his microphone on mute at the moment. But just while Cameron's addressing that, there is one other question for you, Damien, that a couple of the participants have asked, and that is in regards to that app that you were talking. You mentioned an app that could be used to recording. Can you just let the people know what the name of that app is?
You know what? I'd love to, but I can't remember it, and I've only got my work phone here, so I'd have to. I'm sorry, but the way I found it, and there's a whole plethora of different apps that you can use in there, and I just simply typed in itinerary into the search bar in the App Store. And it's a matter of, and what I did, I probably checked out about 5 or 6 before I got one that actually I thought was going to work for me, because my idea was I wanted to have a quick photograph of the item, so that if it was stolen, I could then prove it was mine by you know, any unique markings or scratches or the state of disrepair it might be in or whatever it may be. And also then I could also upload a photograph of the serial number or input it, and it gave me and it could be it gave me the option to put in so it might have been, and look, I'm thinking about not specifically my circumstance, but you might have machinery shed as one line item, and then you can go into that and put all the items in the machinery shed. You might have workshop, you might have chemical shed, or whatever it may be that you feel the need to record. But this app it took me 5 or 6 goes to find one where I could get sufficient photographs and data to support those photographs, where I was happy with where I got to with it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Damien. That's great.
Yeah, I might just add on to that, just in respect to the app. And a big benefit of that, as opposed to taking records and written records, is that in an instant, you know, that image can be sent to a rural crime investigator, the police, and we can circulate that quite quickly in terms of you know, putting the message out there that's been stolen. And we've had some significant success in that in recent times. And as Damien alluded to, our Rural Crime Prevention Team Facebook page is quite effective in respect to that. So I'd encourage you to do it. It's quite simple, and it's probably something even your kids could do, just to play around. If you've got young kids to do the same thing, it's a bit of fun. It's not so much an Easter hunt or anything like that, but it's a good way to record things and keep kids occupied, to record all your valuable machinery and equipment.
Thanks, Cameron. While I've got you talking, I actually have a question here I'd like to direct to you. So Michael has asked the question, what are the most common items stolen?
Oh, in terms of common things stolen, the things that we're seeing, our biggest concern is obviously stock theft, you know, whether it be from goats, sheep, cattle and other smaller animals. But the regular things that we're encountering that are stolen around the state on a regular basis, and it also depends on what area, but firearms are a big concern, in which I know one of our topics, we'll get to that later in the forthcoming weeks, but firearms is a big concern. And just more or less items that are easily accessible and removed. We go right through to the organised crime in terms of you know, big numbers of stock, but it's those opportunist crimes, more or less things, anything that's not nailed down that they'll take. But it's around the quad bikes, motorcycles, other equipment, and things along those lines. Our main concern is obviously the stock theft and the delay in reporting of that stock theft. It's very important that we report that as soon as possible, so the rural crime investigators can put the best foot forward and try and recover that forensic evidence.
Thank you, Cameron. Now, Bennett, I've got a question for you. Narelle has asked here, how do you get around that every sign that we have put up has been destroyed?
Yeah, good question, Narelle. Unfortunately, that does happen, and it's something we experience fairly frequently. But I mean, you can only try, and the harder you try, the more deterrence you're going to provide to the criminals that are trying to break into your place. You can consider things like putting signs further up in an area that can't be reached as easily, or things like getting a sign that's made of a material that's probably a bit more difficult to destroy. Any sort of sign maker can make up a sign on a steel surface or something along those lines. But really, if your signs are getting damaged or destroyed, just report that to us so we know where the problems are occurring. And every incident of a sign being destroyed is an incident of malicious damage that we can come and investigate.
I might touch on something else with that, if it's okay. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
just
please
go
ahead.
Just to take that a step further in terms of the sign, if someone's gone to the point of damaging your sign, experience tells me that they're there to do something else, or and up to no good. And whilst Bennett said, yeah, we can replace them, and we've got plenty of signs that if we're out and about, just ask the rural crime investigator, we can replace those signs. But it gets back to what Damien was saying in respect to the CCTV and cameras, and there's quite inexpensive small trail cameras that you can put up. And I suggest if they're going to come back once or twice, they're going to come back again. And yes, the trail cameras do get stolen, but we suggest and we encourage that you put a trail camera up somewhere, but have another trail camera that is not accessible watching that trail camera. And it just helps another layer of, as Damien says, another layer of target hardening that makes it harder. And just to push on in respect to where to put cameras up, and quite often we think we have to have expensive cameras, but quite often a lot of our success is from cheaper cameras that are self-installed and put in places where they're not going to be shone on by headlights and and can't record anything. But you can go to right to the other extent too, is having quite significant cameras that can pick up someone hundreds of meters away. So whilst we've gone off track in respect to the signage, those cameras can solve a lot of problems for yourself in target hardening, but it makes our job a damn sight easier too.
Thank you, Cameron. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 5 minutes to go. So I've just got another question here, and I'll throw this to all three of you to answer. This is from Narelle, and she's asked, is it still current law that you have not allowed to voice record and use as evidence through security systems set up around your property? Gentlemen?
Who wants to have a shot at this one?
I'm happy to jump in there. I believe the use of audio recordings is not allowed if you're not a party to the conversation. In saying that, you can record to protect your lawful interests. So if you believe that's protecting your lawful interests, then there is an exemption there. As far as recording video or photos go, it's pretty much free game as long as the camera's on your place or on public property. You can set up a camera wherever you like, and you don't have to disclose where that camera is to anyone. I don't know if anyone else there wants to add to that.
Yeah, I might just jump in and have a quick crack. So the Surveillance Devices Act governs the recording of voice recordings, and as Bennett points out, there are exemptions to that. But probably importantly to know, if you're going to use surveillance equipment and options on your property, it's governed by the Surveillance Devices Act, and you can do that. And the basic rule of thumb there is back to where your camera is located, not what it's filming. So you can film pretty much anything on your own property and out onto a public area, provided the camera is on your property. But of course, there's restrictions there too in terms of filming in private areas such as bathrooms and that sort of thing. But very importantly, you should be aware of the Workplace Surveillance Act. So whilst you have the right to conduct surveillance electronically on your property, if you've got workers there are a few conditions, and just basically they have to be advised in writing that there's electronic surveillance going on and that they'll be being filmed. And also there must be signage up around the areas where those cameras are being used. Thanks,
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. So would you encourage there, Damien, that they could also use the RCIs you mentioned before, that they can use our rural crime investigators for security assessments that could be included in that type of assessment?
Yeah, look, in that prevention space, we will always jump at an opportunity. If someone's serious about having a look at their property with a fresh set of eyes, and maybe some of our specialist investigators who are responding to crimes and know where the areas of vulnerabilities are and know about safer by design principles, I think it's a really good opportunity for us, and we would always take that, especially if the tea and scones and bickies are on as well. We would always turn up and do our best to have a good and thorough assessment of your property, have a drive around, and maybe open your eyes up to things that you just really hadn't considered that might be simple ways and cost-effective ways to really make a difference.
Thank you, Damien. And I just want to invite New South Wales Farmers to make comment on that in regards to the workplace relations perspective.
Thanks, Anne, and thank you to Damien. I think he made a really good point about the workplace surveillance there. And one of the great services of New South Wales Farmers is its workplace relations service. If you do have questions around if you are going to install cameras, it'd be great if, as a member of New South Wales Farmers, you can touch base with our workplace relations team and get that tailored advice to make sure that you are obviously protecting your interests, but also protecting yourself from any potential employee issues on your farm. So I just wanted to really reinforce what Damien said there, to be conscious of the workplace surveillance issues, and make sure that you are, while your best interests of looking after your property are there, you don't want to be having an employee come back to you and saying that you've been unlawfully filming me. So thanks for that, Damien. I'll just again reinforce. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Damien, Cameron and Bennett, for participating. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the presentation from the Rural Crime Prevention team, and we will hand the webinar back over to New South Wales Farmers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Damien, Cameron and Bennett, for your presentation and valuable suggestions towards tackling rural crime. I'm sure tonight's participants have found the webinar useful and will take away great ideas and suggestions that you put into place. Lastly, thank you to you, the participants, for your support. And don't forget, the next webinar will take place on the 5th of November at 7 p.m, focusing on the topic of illegal hunting. We hope that you will be able to join us for that webinar, and we wish you all good night. Thank you once again, everyone.